Thank you for having me, and thank you for the question. It's a very important question, uh, and I think what's happening, what's being illuminated by COVID, are the generations of structural inequities and disparities that have not been addressed in this country. And so, the idea of communities of color being more, um, seeing more higher incidence rates, higher death rates, is not surprising to anyone because the conditions that have allowed this situation to happen in the first place has been what we've been fighting for and against, right? So the constant avoidance of representation, the constant avoidance of providing um, community infrastructure that can prevent disasters like this from happening. And so when we observe communities of color that are densely populated, that lack adequate resources, that are chronically underfunded, with poor education systems or underfunded education systems, uh, poor recreational facilities, poor maintenance of public housing, this is not surprising to anyone. So, why are communities of color being hit the hardest is because we haven't done right by communities of color in this country. And because we continue to ignore, because we continue not to listen to communities of color regarding their needs, we fail to meet the basic expectations that one requires to live a healthy and productive life. And so when a virus, and now we're dealing with a pandemic, happens, communities that were already vulnerable will be at higher and greater risk. And so these communities that were already vulnerable indeed are the ones that are suffering disproportionately from the impact of COVID. And so, unless these mechanisms are in place, the likelihood of this occurring again is not a matter of if, but when. And so, what we would need, and what communities of color, our communities need to prevent this from happening is one, I think a reinvestment or a reinvestment in our educational systems. I think that what has happened with the very archaic way we continue to fund education, it creates this enormous divide in communities. And so, if there's failure to understand how viruses work, if there's failure to understand biology, if there's failure to understand hygiene, if there's failure to understand, critical education that are being received in white suburban or rural communities, and our densely populated communities of color lack that, then it's going to be problematic. So we honestly have to reinvest in education, but it's not the only thing that we can do. We also need to engage in honest dialogue and conversation regarding the structural and generational problems that continue to take place in these communities. And so it's very easy when people want to just identify, well, what do we do? Well, let's just jump to the solutions. But if we don't engage in very candid and very real conversations about these problems and why they persist, then the solutions at times may be largely ineffective or not sustainable. And so we really need to have community representation, community leadership, and community voices elevated, but also heard and listened to. Because the communities have been saying this for a very long time. This isn't new. They've known this stuff for a very long time. Nothing that I'm saying will be new to anyone who is in this circumstance. They know this. They know the conditions because it's generational. And so when they speak up about it, their voices are not heard. They are dismissed, they are discredited, and they are demonized. And that's the one thing that we can't afford to do that now. We really do have to listen to communities of color because they deal with uh, enormous social conditions that most white communities do not deal with. They do not deal with. And the other solution will have to be economic empowerment and economic investment. So part of that community investment that I talk about includes economic empowerment and economic investment. We need to financially invest in communities of color. We need to financially invest in communities of color. And if we do not do that, then again, we are not empowering people with the resources, the availability of resources, adequate resources, reliable resources to take care of themselves the way that they need to take care of themselves and their families. And so, if that isn't done, then the infrastructure of communities will continue to crumble or deteriorate. And so we must identify ways of reinvesting financial resources into the communities that are most in need of those financial resources. And unless we engage in that process, and unless we engage in that conversation, unless we engage in the reallocation of resources to communities that are dealing with extreme challenges and complications, I don't see this changing. And we also need to talk about the ways in which racism has a role to play in all of this. I mean, it's the crux of this conversation. It really is the crux of this conversation. The lack of financial investment, the lack of community infrastructure, the deterioration of community is all rooted in a racist society. And so, if we are not having conversations about the roles of racism and power and privilege, and why communities of color continue to be negatively impacted at almost any indicator that we are selecting from, then this will not change. So, racism has to be a central part of the conversation because racism is the problem. Racism is the problem. COVID illuminated our sort of racist structure. It illuminated the racist structure that we have in this country. And so when communities of color are more impacted, well, it's because of the roles in which racism has played in keeping communities structured the way that they are structured, in keeping communities densely populated, in keeping communities without adequate educational resources, in keeping communities without adequate community-based resources, in keeping communities underfunded, underrepresented. So that is of a deeply rooted structure that's tied to historical inequities. And so, if we don't address racism, and we know we are in this moment of really trying to advance racial diversity, racial equity, and racial inclusion, if we don't address racism, which is the heart of the problem, then our communities will continue to suffer. And part of the solution will have to be engaging in honest dialogue on the role of racism. We can't avoid it. We can't avoid it because whenever we avoid it, communities of color continue to suffer. And I don't know how much more suffering, and I don't know how many more deaths, how many more lives needs to be lost, how many more lives need to be taken until we take this seriously. And so COVID is but one grave example of a deeply rooted problem that we have in this country. So we have to engage in some very radical solutions. It has to be radical solutions. It cannot be more of the same. And now really is the time to discuss the reallocation of resources and the distribution of resources to communities that are most in need. When young people encounter challenges and pushbacks, and we talk about empowerment, for me, I'm going to use myself as an example. When I observed conditions in my community, I knew very well that there was something wrong and there was something off. Um, and it felt wrong. What was happening felt wrong. What I was seeing felt wrong. And whenever I tried to voice those concerns, whenever I tried to voice my discontent with the situation, it was not my peers that wasn't listening. It was those who were in positions of leadership that were stopping the conversations from taking place. And so the youth are incredibly resilient. They go through a lot and they know more about the system than many people in leadership positions that are tasked with fixing these systems. And so it's not an empowerment issue for youth. It is an empowerment issue for people in leadership positions that do not listen to youth enough, that do not authentically value their voices, that do not authentically value their experiences. That's where the work needs to be done. Because if we have learned anything about this generation, is that they are incredibly disruptive. They will make their voices heard and they will identify ways of solving problems. They are problem solvers, they are disruptors, and they are disrupting this system or systems, whatever that means. And because they're doing that, there's a great sense of power and a great feeling of power that's associated with that. And so when we say empowerment, empowerment is just really equipping people with the information. It's equipping people with the information in order to make the decisions for themselves that they know to be right. Youth are they're empowered beyond measure. They're empowered beyond measure. Now, what they may not have at all times is the context, maybe historical context, but they are dealing with some very real life difficult situations. And in order for this to change, I think you will have to continue to be disruptors. You will have to continue to be rebellious. You will have to continue to challenge the status quo, because unless that happens, then our communities will continue to suffer. Unless that happens, we will be engaged in yet another 400 years of marginalization, oppression, subjugation, and racism. And so it is this generation, these youth voices, that will serve as a key component as to what change looks like for this country and what transformation looks like for this country. What do we imagine for ourselves? Because they will be the ones that will lead this country eventually, and as they are already leading now, because their voices are being heard, because they are making their voices heard. So those in incredibly powerful positions of leadership must listen authentically, because the youth voice, as it was during the civil rights movement, serves as a catalyst to social transformation. And the youth voice is serving as a catalyst for social transformation now. And unless we amplify their voices, unless we honestly and authentically see them and validate their experiences and affirm what they've gone through, affirm what they are telling us, then there's no hope. There's no hope if we do not do these things. And they are hopeful. They are hopeful that the society can be better. And I believe that the society can be better because of the incredible leadership from the youth today, who are just not taking no for an answer, and will do what is right. Many of them are not concerned with being right. They will do what is right because they see the disparities. They feel the disparities. They see the inequities. They feel the inequities. They see the distrust and they feel the distrust. And because they experience and they see and they feel all of these things, they will do what is necessary to transform the society and to transform systems. It's a question I have to field every day. In my current role in California, I serve as the director of the Dually Involved Youth Initiative. So that's youth that has involvement in the child welfare system and youth that is involved in the juvenile justice system. And that's probably the last time on this video I'll say or refer to this as a justice system, because it is anything but. However, it's complicated, it's complex, and it highlights the various challenges that youth that are caught and trapped um, in one system or another have to deal with, and they're layered. So regarding educational gaps and challenges for youth that are involved, especially during COVID, and how receiving formal education just stopped. Highlighted a range of other problems. One, because many youth that are system involved do present with needing individual education plans, IEPs, individualized education plans. And given the nature of how communities were responding to limit person to person interaction and to limit contact and consequently exposure, they were not able to receive the services and the supports, the rap supports that they would ordinarily receive that can help um, their positive development. And so education is one of those early fields that we notice gaps in. And it's not only the access to education, but also the collateral consequences of that. Once schools shifted to a virtual environment, many of these youth did not have reliable access to the internet. Many of these young people did not have a reliable laptop or a computer at home. And so, how were they supposed to get in and do work? Now, that's just part of the challenge. That's just part of the challenge. Imagine, imagine being a young person, a young adult, and you're dealing with so much in your life. You're dealing with so much in your life. You're tied to a system where there's clear collateral consequences, and you're fully understanding what that means as you transition into adulthood. You are bouncing from foster placement to foster placement. So there's this internal sense of, well, nobody wants me. Am I good enough? And then you're dealing with the anxiety of, where am I going to sleep tonight? The potential of being homeless, the potential of being commercially sexually exploited, the potential to be a victim of harm or trauma, because this is all they are already traumatized, or just the exacerbation of trauma. And now, in the middle of all of this, we say, go to school, pay attention, as if it's easy, and it's not. So the gaps in the personalized educational supports that they need were not and could not be provided in that sense. When you shift those supports virtual, then you have to deal with the natural technology gaps and accessibility gaps that they are dealing with. And for anyone who's grown up, I mean, it's complicated. Even as adults, we want to go out and we want to socialize. We are social beings. We are social beings. It's really difficult to tell young people, hey, just stay indoors, don't go out. They understand the gravity of the situation, but they live very complex lives. They are dealing with a lot. Sometimes socializing is the only way in which they are acknowledged and seen in this world. So they will go and seek out the experience that validates their existence. And the challenges of that is, well, the foster parent can say, well, you are jeopardizing my safety, or you're jeopardizing the safety of those that are in the home. We don't want you here. We don't want you here. And now, as a young person, I'm thinking, well, where am I going to go? What park bench can I sleep on? What friend or family member can I call? And for those who are leading the systems, we have to identify placement. And we know family placement is one of the top three challenges that exist in the social services. Who do we identify? Who do we place them with? Who do we call? Where do they go? And so while we're trying to get the answers, they're dealing with this real situation of, well, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? Who wants me? And COVID has highlighted structural problems that we have been dealing with for a very long time. We have been dealing with for a very long time, and we were unprepared. We were unprepared for the ways in which it was going to highlight the incredible gaps and disparities and mistreatment in these systems. And who are the ones that are most impacted by this? Youth of color. They're overrepresented in the system. It's youth of color who are going to be most negatively impacted by this. And so education is inherently and fundamentally intertwined with economic opportunity and outcomes. That's intertwined with, health outcomes. And because of the intersection of all of these things, you're taking young people who are still mentally developing, dealing with enormous trauma, pain, hurt, anger, and rage, while systems try to figure out solutions that they've been trying to figure out at times for a very long time. And so it's not easy. It's not easy being a young person who is trapped. And I don't use this lightly, who is trapped in the legal system or in the child welfare system. There's some real dangers and consequences for them, and they know these dangers and consequences. And because they are the ones living it, firsthand. And it is incumbent upon us to identify a safe placement for a young person to go. It's not just the identification of any placement. More importantly, is a safe placement where they will feel safe, where they will be acknowledged, where they will be validated. That has to be provided. That is a basic necessity of life. For successful transition into adulthood, they need this. And our systems at times too often have failed to provide this. So for a young person who's processing all of this, and it's not just the immediate things, many of them from early childhood were attached to one of the systems, especially in early childhood to the social services or child welfare system. And then naturally, if there's attachment or involvement there, there's an increased likelihood of involvement into the legal system. And now they're bouncing back. They're bouncing back between systems. Who's responsible for finding adequate and safe placement? And when we can't identify a safe placement, we often take a very dangerous and traumatic route. We lock them up. We use detention facilities as if they were placements. We don't want to do that, but it's the only way we convince ourselves that they can be safe. They have some place to sleep. So in doing that, we exacerbate harm. We exacerbate trauma. And then they are labeled, and at times labeled for life. And the collateral consequences of system involvement are very real. They are in danger of not being able to qualify for housing assistance or educational assistance as they transition into adulthood or when they become adults. For youth that are trapped in this system, I cannot say enough the responsibility that these systems have of helping heal the hurt, the trauma, the anger, the frustration, and the rage. But it also begs the question of, well, whenever I keep saying, and it's at this point I must frame it like, what are these systems, the legal system, the child welfare system? These are people. They are people who make decisions regarding the lives of young people who are caught up in this. They are people. Systems are people. They are people making decisions. And so the ones that are entrusted with the health, care, and safety of young people must identify solutions that actually help young people, that actually listen to young people, validate their experiences. And we're dealing with the challenges now. So the educational gaps, the economic gaps, The healthcare gaps that we noticed pre-COVID will be exacerbated because they were already a vulnerable population. And when you include system involvement, it increases likelihood of bouncing back from one system to another. And now they're at greater risk. They're at greater risk. They are victims. They are victims of a society that has continued to fail youth of color. They're victims. And until we can identify how to address and heal, then we're going to be having the same conversation 10, 20, 30 years from now.